In the quiet dawn of a new generation, the United States Army stands at a crossroads. For decades, it's been defined by grit, tradition, and a sense of duty passed down from one era to the next. But now, something different is happening. The uniforms are the same, the mission endures, but the faces, the minds, the voices, belong to a generation unlike any that came before. This is the story of how Gen Z is rebuilding the U.S. Army. And it's not what you think. It begins with a crisis. In 2022, Army recruitment numbers hit their lowest point in decades. The military missed its enlistment goals by tens of thousands. The headlines were stark. Young Americans weren't signing up. Analysts pointed to an array of reasons: pandemic isolation, political division, economic shifts, even a cultural drift away from traditional patriotism. But beneath the data was something deeper, more human. The values that had driven generations to serve, the sense of national duty, adventure, or family legacy, were being replaced by something new. Gen Z wasn't rejecting the idea of service. They were redefining it. This generation grew up in a world of constant connectivity and constant uncertainty. They came of age through war, recession, climate anxiety, and viral change. They witnessed institutions falter and adapt. For them, authority isn't sacred. It's earned. Trust is fragile, and transparency isn't optional. So when recruiters came knocking with slogans from the past, they didn't bite. They wanted to know what they were really fighting for, what kind of organization they'd be part of, and how their service would matter in a world that feels like it is on the edge of something new. At first, the Army didn't know how to answer. For decades, its recruitment strategy leaned on tradition, valor, sacrifice, belonging. But Gen Z's world speaks in the language of purpose, identity, and impact. They don't just want to serve their country, they want to shape it. So the Army began to listen. Inside recruitment offices, leadership meetings, and training bases, a quiet transformation began. The Army started rethinking not only how it recruits, but who it recruits for. It launched programs that targeted skills in cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, linguistics, and climate resilience. Instead of focusing solely on combat readiness, the new mission expanded to include digital defense and humanitarian response. Soldiers were no longer just warriors, they were technologists, innovators, and problem solvers. And for a generation raised on the internet, the idea of defending the nation through code, data, and drone systems felt relevant, tangible. But this wasn't just a shift in strategy, it was a shift in culture. Gen Z soldiers brought with them a new set of expectations about leadership, communication, and accountability. They questioned old hierarchies and demanded dialogue. They valued mental health, personal autonomy, and purpose over blind obedience. Some veterans saw this as softness at first, a threat to discipline, but others recognized it as evolution. Because when the mission changes, so must the mindset. At Fort Jackson in South Carolina, the largest Army basic training site in the country, drill sergeants began adapting their approach. The days of purely fear-based motivation were fading. In their place came mentorship, firm but understanding. Trainees were encouraged to speak up, to think critically, to take ownership of their learning. This wasn't about lowering standards. It was about changing the psychology of command. A generation that had been raised to question everything was now being taught how to channel that instinct into leadership. Technology played its part too. The Army's new virtual training environments mirrored the worlds Gen Z grew up in: digital, immersive, fast-paced. Augmented reality simulations let recruits experience battlefield scenarios with lifelike intensity, blending gaming instincts with tactical decision-making. Online communities and social media became part of the Army's outreach, not as propaganda, but as conversation. Soldiers posted videos, shared stories, built followings. They humanized the uniform. For the first time, the Army wasn't just seen from the outside. It was speaking from within. And then came the shift in who was serving. The new generation of soldiers is more diverse than any before it, racially, culturally, ideologically. Gen Z has rewritten what American identity looks like. And that reality is reshaping the Army's identity too. In barracks and training camps, young men and women from every background are learning to trust each other, to work together, to redefine what unity means. It's not the forced sameness of the past. It's the strength that comes from difference. The Army began addressing mental health more openly, breaking a long-held silence. Suicide prevention programs expanded. Counseling became less stigmatized. Commanders started receiving training on empathy, listening, and trauma awareness. It wasn't about making the Army softer. It was about making it stronger, more sustainable. A soldier who feels seen, who feels supported, fights with clarity. Meanwhile, new recruits are finding unconventional paths into service. Some come from coding boot camps instead of military families. Others are college dropouts, seeking meaning in a world that feels chaotic. There are climate scientists joining the Corps of Engineers, data analysts in cyber defense units, and filmmakers documenting humanitarian missions. The Army is becoming a mirror of the modern world, a place where national service doesn't just mean combat, but contribution. Still, this transformation isn't without friction. Critics worry that the Army's modernization risks diluting its warrior ethos. They argue that war at its core is still brutal, still physical, still demands toughness, and they're not wrong. But the Army's leadership insists that toughness now takes many forms. Resilience of the body, of course, but also resilience of the mind, the heart, and the code. In a world where battles are fought as much in cyberspace as on the ground, the Army's definition of the front line is expanding. Gen Z soldiers might never see a traditional battlefield, but they may defend the country from a laptop in Virginia or a forward base in Poland. They may use drones to save civilians in disaster zones or stop an enemy hack before it reaches an American hospital. The idea of service has become multidimensional. And yet, some things haven't changed. The Army still demands sacrifice. Families still say goodbye at airports, still wait by the phone. The cost of service remains real. But what's shifting is the sense of ownership. The idea that the future Army isn't just an institution young people join. It's something they're helping to rebuild from within. They're rewriting the code of service, literally and metaphorically. In 2025, the Army announced new initiatives led by young officers to improve sustainability, energy efficiency, and community engagement. Solar power grids on bases, educational partnerships with tech companies, and outreach programs in underrepresented communities. These weren't top-down orders, they were bottom-up ideas, driven by Gen Z soldiers who wanted their service to mean something beyond the battlefield. There's a quiet irony in all of this. For years, older generations labeled Gen Z as disengaged, too online, too self-involved. But when faced with a system that didn't reflect their values, they didn't walk away. They started to rebuild it. From inside one of America's oldest institutions, they're modernizing the meaning of patriotism itself. The Army of the 21st century isn't just about might. It's about adaptability, empathy, and innovation. And that's exactly what Gen Z brings to the table. They aren't trying to erase the past. They're trying to carry it forward into a world that looks nothing like it did before. They're proving that the strength of a nation doesn't come from clinging to tradition, but from having the courage to redefine it. In the echo of marching boots and the hum of servers, in the quiet courage of those who sign up not because they have to, but because they believe they can make it better, something profound is taking shape. The Army is being rebuilt, not by force, but by vision. Not through conformity, but through conviction. And as the next generation steps forward, armed not just with weapons, but with questions, ideas, and a restless drive to improve, the old saying takes on new meaning. Freedom isn't just defended by power, it's preserved by progress. Because the future of the U.S. Army isn't about fighting the wars of yesterday. It's about building the peace of tomorrow.